Well, good morning again. I'm Simon. I'm with ChargeHub. I'm CEO at ChargeHub. For those who are not familiar with ChargeHub, we're primarily a software company. We've been in the EV charging space for the last 10 plus years. The mission of the company is to make charging as seamless as fueling a gas vehicle. That's really what we're all about. That's what we strive to do every day. Now, how do we do this? There's two main sides to what we do. Some people may be more familiar with the ChargeHub app, which is an app that we have that enables drivers to find public charging stations throughout the US and Canada, see if they're available or not, and also activate charging stations across a bunch of different networks through that single app. That's actually the part of ChargeHub that most people know. However, that's not even the core of what ChargeHub is. The core of what ChargeHub is ChargeHub is an e-roaming hub. So what's an e-roaming hub? An e-roaming hub is a way for a single point in the ecosystem to be connected to a whole bunch of different public charging networks so that any entity, whether that's a fleet, whether that's an automaker, whether that's any company that needs access to the public charging infrastructure can pass through that one hub and then access a plethora of charging networks. Maybe an analogy that I can use here in Canada would be Interac. If you look at Interac is one way that is connected to all the different banks such that you can, as one individual, send money to people who have accounts with a whole bunch of different banks, regardless of which banks they're on. So you can kind of look at us in a way as being the Interac of public charging. Now, when it comes to fleets and public charging, well, if you go back just a couple of years ago, fleets and EVs and public charging, you really didn't hear much about any of that stuff. But that's ramping up pretty fast. And to me, the main thing that, there's reasons for that, whether that's, the actual cost of ownership of the EVs that makes more interesting, whether those are targets that are being voluntarily imposed by the fleets on themselves, whether those are government targets that are setting that up. There's a feedback. I don't know if it's this mic that's giving the feedback, but that sounds better. But one of the main things to note to me is, the numbers in the top right corner in this graph here is that no matter what, when you start getting into 5 years out, there's going to be a substantial amount of vehicles that will have to be EVs. And therefore, as fleets, there will be a substantial amount of fleet vehicles that will be EVs. And 5 years out, that's like tomorrow. And when it comes to that, as a fleet, you need to plan for this. And I'm sure anyone who's in the fleet world here knows that, already plans those things out. But to me, the message is, when it comes to public charging, if there's going to be any need for public charging within your fleet applications, there's really two times where you can really start planning for what's coming, because it's tomorrow. You can either start planning yesterday or you can start planning today. Because if you start planning for how you're going to be doing it tomorrow, you're not going to be planning. You're just going to be reacting. And by then, it's too late. We've seen it in the automotive space with some of the automakers that deployed their vehicles without necessarily having strategies when it comes to public charging, which in generally most EV drivers do not feel their automakers is providing them a good public charging experience. You don't want to be that as a fleet. So if we're talking about planning, we're talking about public charging infrastructure. What is the current state of the public charging infrastructure? That's step one in terms of planning is knowing what you're dealing with. Right now in the US and Canada, there's over 100 different public charging networks that are operating public charger. There's over 200,000 individual public chargers, and those numbers are going up, 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 and up. There's no consolidation that we're seeing in the short term on that front. You can just expect those numbers to keep going up for the coming years. So when it comes to planning anything having to do with public charging, when it comes to fleet, You have to know what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a highly fragmented ecosystem. And so the fact that you've got a very fragmented ecosystem kind of makes public charging for fleets a somewhat of a complex thing to deal with. And in the same way as no two fleets are the same, no two public charging solutions for fleet are going to be the same. There's no one size fits all here. If you've got medium heavy duty vehicles that are charging mostly on depot charging, but sometimes need some public charging, is a very different use case than if your fleet is actually composed of car sharing vehicles that are being used by individual across a downtown area, or if you're actually a car rental company running out of an airport. Those are all fleet applications, very different use cases, still probably going to have to need either a little bit of public charging, some public charging, or a lot of public charging. And so overall, the thing to keep in mind that we've seen recently is a lot of people, when they're doing their planning when it comes to charging for their fleet needs, they think of, oh, what's going to be my primary case? Oh, my type of fleet are actually vehicle that it's my employees and they take them home. So it's mainly home charging for my fleet. That might be 80% of your fleet's need. But what's the plan when it comes to public charging? Are these vehicles going to be 100% home charging? Probably not. Same thing with depot charging. So you always have to kind of have at least some level of plan when it comes to public charging in your fleet application. Again, different fleets will have different plans and the actual need is going to vary. So this is the bad news part of the presentation. So if you're thinking, hey, I'm ahead of this, I know I'm going to need this public charging stuff, and I've already got public fueling in my fleet, and I use these fuel cards, these fleet fuel cards, and that's what I use for public fueling. So I'm just going to use this for public charging. I'm sorry, but that's not going to cut it right now. The reality today is that the majority of public chargers cannot accept start directly via a credit card. What we're seeing in the ecosystem also is we're not seeing this taking off and overtaking everything. When I talk to the people from the credit card industry, they're telling me that the industry as a whole does not necessarily want the cards themselves to be the thing that starts a charging event. They want it to be backed by a credit card, but they're looking for safer means of actually starting this. There's a lot of potential for fraud. There's no identification. Anyone that picks up the card can start charging anywhere. So as an industry, we're seeing, especially for fleets, we're seeing all the solution providers in the fleet space when it comes to cards really want the fleet to move towards phone-based or other ways of having authentication that is backed by a credit card, but has another layer of authentication. So let's say that credit card was not already your strategy, or maybe it was, and now you're thinking maybe I need a bigger strategy, a more wholesome strategy. What are the things that you should be looking at as you set up your strategy? What are things to have on your radar? Start thinking about what's going to be the technical integrations that you're going to need to put in place in order to have your fleet public charging set up down the line. Think of what are going to be the legal agreements that are going to be needed in there. How are you going to work with support for your drivers? We've worked with some fleets where they forgot about that one. They're just doing a little pilot. They did a really good job on technical integration, everything, but they forgot what's going to be the support in case there's an issue. And I'm sorry to say, there will be issues if your drivers are going and they're charging on public chargers, at least for the next few years. This is an early ecosystem. There are still a lot of issues happening when it comes to drivers being at charging stations and not successfully being able to get a charge. So what's your support plan? Have you thought of accounting? How does that connect your charging accounting? How does it connect with your existing accounting systems? So are you bringing everything in one place, combining your fueling and your charging in one place? And then how does it work in terms of getting the funds to the partners? Again, all depending on what your approach is. Are you working directly with charging networks? Are you working through other entities along the way? But think about that. And then think about the commercial terms that come with the public charging. So those are the 5 general areas you should have on your radar as you're setting up your public charging strategy. And then the next stage is to look at your fleet. So what is your fleet? We said earlier, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. So you have to start by thinking, well, where does my fleet operate? Or where do the fleet solutions I provide to fleets, where do those fleet operate to make sure that I provide them the right solutions for what they need? It's a very different thing if you're a very local fleet of vehicle rental that stays within a city versus if you're an international fleet that has vehicles throughout North America. It's going to be a whole different game in terms of how you're going to have to interact with the public charging world. Another key aspect is what's your timeline? Depending on when the EVs are coming in your fleet, at what rate, to what level, that's going to change what you can or can't do. You probably don't want to be doing a complete change of your solution midway through the process. So if you know that you're starting to get EVs, typically what we're seeing once a fleet starts to go above 5% of EV penetration in the fleet, fleets really want to start to have automated and more custom tools to manage the EV charging. If all you've got is one EV in a fleet of 5,000 vehicles, you can probably deal with that with a piece of paper on the corner of the desk and work that out. But as you start getting, typically what we're seeing is 5%, it becomes too big of a load to start to have its own separate process on the side. After looking at where you operate, what you operate in, start thinking about what exactly do you want the charging experience to be? What do you need it to be? Do you need to have a high level of control on that spending? Do you need to know it was which driver with which vehicle on which day, at what place, at what time? Do you need that level? Or are you more at the end where all you need is for the EV charging to somehow get reconciled with the rest of the fueling expenses, regardless of which vehicle it was and all those things? That's really going to change what you're going to need as a solution in the end. Do you need the drivers to be authenticated? So what level of security in a way do you need? In some cases right now, some fleets just leave the credit cards for gas fueling, just leave them in the glove box, and whoever takes that vehicle takes that card. If there was ever any fraud on that card, well, it's that card. You don't really necessarily know who it was. Where other entities already have situations where there's a lot more checks and balances for this. Also think about what's your current situation when it comes to technology as a fleet. Are we talking about fleets where there's already a use of phone and apps that is integrated in the fleets? Or are we talking about a company that has no company phones, no company apps, doesn't even have an approach for this, or even more difficult, already has a policy of no one can use a phone, no one can use apps? Those are going to be barriers for you to tie into the public charging ecosystem, which the public charging ecosystem was born in a time where phones and apps were already ubiquitous. So a lot of the infrastructure relies on this technology for access. So once you've looked at where you operate, how you operate, what you would like the fleet scenario to be in terms of how you're going to interact with the public charging, well, then it becomes a case of understanding what do you have as resources to meet that vision, given the environment you're in. And one of the things I'd say today is I have yet to see whether a fleet or a fleet solution provider or an automaker, for that sake, overestimate the amount of effort. Everyone underestimates the amount of effort it's going to take them to do that, whether that's in terms of cost, resources, or time to get there. Everyone I've seen so far in the ecosystem has always underestimated that. And the thing to keep in mind as you're doing this is you have to go back to what it takes every time a fleet will have to access a network that's on a charger that's on a different network. There's going to need to be a business agreement in place. There's going to need to be a legal agreement in place. There's going to need to be a unique technical integration in place, and there's going to need to be a periodic accounting reconciliation. So you got to think in terms of the ecosystem. Every time there's a fleet vehicle charging on a new network, those 4 things need to be in place somewhere along the line to actually make that transaction happen. And so to make that happen, there's typically 2 very opposite ways that you can go about it. So you can either build it all yourself, do it yourself, start from scratch. I'm saying this whether you're someone who's currently operating a fleet directly, or whether you're currently in a company that creates solutions for fleet. Doesn't matter. You could decide to build all of this yourself from scratch. The thing so far that we've seen is that's one side. The other side is you start connecting to what I call dedicated platforms, to different platforms that are dedicated to solving the public charging ecosystem for fleets. And so when it comes to the build it yourself approach, we've only seen it, and I'm not even sure I would call it successful, but somewhat viable might be the right word, is if you're talking about a very small number of connections. You're a very restricted fleet that only operates in a very small zone, and you only need access to 3 public chargers of the same network. Maybe you can work something out on a one-on-one basis with that network. But even then, things really start to fall apart the minute there's a need for expansion in the future. So what we're seeing is where entities, whether in the fleet world, even automakers who have started a do-it-yourself approach in the past, they succeed with 1, maybe with 2 connections, and then things really start bogging down as they start going to more and more having to interconnect more and more networks, and then overloading their legal team because they need legal agreements every time, their business team because they need business agreement every time, their technical team because they need a whole new technical integration every time. And those are not just plug and play technical integration. There's intricacies to each and every one of them. You can't reuse their previous one for that. And then their accounting team is starting to rip their hair out because every month or every week they need to send reconciliation to so many different networks. So that's one side. The other side is to use what I'm going to refer to as a centralized approach. So essentially, in a centralized approach, what you're doing is you're either you're connecting your fleet directly to a central hub that takes care of dealing with all the fragmentation of the public charging world, or you're connecting your fleet to a solution provider that is then dealing with that. Typically, the solution provider will be at least partly using a hub to deal with that. There may be some direct connections to some networks in there. So that's the other approach. That's the approach that we're seeing is having success so far. It's still an early start to fleets and public charging, but right now that's the approach that entities who are successfully doing this are taking right now. Whoop. Oh, there's a slide missing there. But in any case, I mentioned in the beginning, that we as ChargeHub, we do operate a roaming hub. It's the largest one in North America. We typically play that role of interconnecting a whole bunch of charging networks with either fleet solution providers or directly with the fleets. We deal with all the business agreements, the legal agreements, the technical integration, and the accounting reconciliation with all the different charging networks, so that you as a fleet or as a fleet solution provider, you only need one business agreement with us, one legal agreement with us, one integration with us, and one accounting reconciliation with us. And then any new networks that gets added, you don't need to add anything else on top of that. We deal with all of that on our side. We already are connected to, I think we're now about at 90,000 public charging stations in North America are connected to our hub. We have dozens and dozens of network integrated. There's also a number of fleet solution providers, large one like Holman, ARI, if you're familiar with them, FleetCor, they now changed their name to Corpay, and a number of other big entities who are providing fleet solutions who are using our hub as the way of powering their public charging solutions. So we can work either directly with fleets when that's a good fit. If you're a fleet and you have all the tools, everything in there, your own app, your own electric mobility service provider system in-house, you can connect directly to our hub and we can power that for you. Or you can work with other entities whom we power, like the Holmans and FleetCors and a number of other ones. And so I hope that this was useful to get you thinking about planning when it comes to fleets and public charging. And I look forward to any questions that you may have. I'm going to be here for the rest of the 2 days. So we have a booth at booth 109, I believe. So if you want to stop by the ChargeHub booth, if you have any questions when it comes to fleet and public charging, we're going to be there and ready to answer any questions that you might have. So that's it for me. Any questions you have, please go ahead.